Okay, so this video, it's Kyle Kulinski with Secular Talk. He's talking about the Vivek Ramaswamy interview with Breaking Points. Now, Ramaswamy, he claims that basically people should have to pass some kind of test to be able to vote when they're a certain age. Then he goes on to argue that we should just make those tests like a permanent thing. Now, poll taxes, like those were a thing in history, and they were used by the South to basically exclude African Americans from being able to vote.
So let's watch and we'll break it down.
One of the more controversial things that you've put forward is a proposition that to be able to vote under the age of 25, you would either have to serve in the military or to pass a test. Why, a decent portion of the people who are watching the show, you do a lot of online shows, are actually below the age of 25. What is the case to them to deprive them of their right to vote under the U.S. Constitution?
First of all, this would require a constitutional amendment. So you're absolutely right that the current constitutional state of affairs, this is not something that I'm talking about, is a law. Let me actually share with you, Sagar, this has been distorted many times over, what the heart of my proposal actually is, and then build into that. Nothing you said was inaccurate, but let me get to the heart of the motive. What I've said is every high school student who graduates in this country should have to pass the same civics test that each of our parents, I'm going to presume, had to pass in order to become citizens of this country, right? Every immigrant has to pass in order to become a citizen of this country. I think I'll stand by and wait for a good argument. I still haven't heard one for why high school students in this country, when they turn 18, should not have to know the same things about the country that a naturalized citizen we demand them to know as well. And so now let's talk about actually a legal structure we already have.
Okay, so real quick, I'm just going to show you. So this is just poll tests that they've done throughout history. So these are the types of questions. If you can see this, it's saying in the first circle below, write the last letter of the first word beginning with L. And then, so basically you just had a lot of like nonsensical questions just designed to, again, disenfranchise people and prevent them from being able to vote.
Age 18 to 25, young men in this country have to already register. You did it, I did it, I'm sure.
Yep.
Selective service registration on pain of criminal penalties. You have to register for the draft. I've said that I would actually decriminalize that. I don't think that's the way we should do things in this country. But in return for decriminalizing the selective service mandate for men in the age of 18 to 25, I've said we need to instead tie civic privileges to civic duties, as our founding fathers envisioned. We live in a constitutional republic. That means something. It means our civic privileges come with civic duties attached to them. That's what our founding fathers envisioned. And that's part of what I think.
Okay, real quick. So in 1965, you had the voting rights that was passed. And so a whole purpose of these were to basically to stop having like those types of tests. So this goes into it. This is libraryofcongress.gov. And it's just basically highlighting how a lot of courts or a lot of states, they use what was called the grandfather clause. So basically the clause said you couldn't vote unless your grandfather had voted, or you'd have to pass one of those tests. But if your grandpa could vote, you didn't have to pass one of those tests.
I think we need to revive. And so I've said that, yes, I believe that at least when you're age 18 to 25, that same window where we have selective service mandates today, you at least have to pass that same civics test that an immigrant has to pass, or else tests aren't for everybody. At least serve the country in some minimal way, military or first responder role. And I'll tell you what I expect to happen. Voting rates are very low in kids and young people among the ages of 18 to 25. I think they will skyrocket once we actually make the act of voting mean something. And I think that's actually going to be an important part of our civic revival in our nation.
Let me flip it around then. There's been a lot of discussion around Joe Biden's cognitive abilities. Should there be then a maximum age to vote and when people do lose their cognitive ability? Like if we're going to have some sort of tests in place on the lower end, should we not have them in place on the higher end as well?
So my view is this is not actually a vision for just applying it to young people. This is a vision of what I think should be a civic requirement for really every citizen, but we have to start somewhere. And so I don't believe in somebody who's 60 years old taking away something they've already exercised.
So he's basically arguing that we should create like tests for people to be able to vote regardless of their age. And Kyle's going to bring up a good point, like who's administering these tests, who's making them, who is basically deciding like what's on it, because that can be abused real quick.
For all their life. But at some point, if we agree that this is a good premise, that we want an educated citizenry that lives out its civic duties, feels that sense of civic duty as they go to the ballot box and live their life as citizens, then we're starting with a clean slate that ages into it, with people who age into being citizens first. That's the way I look at it.
I'm just going to be real with you, Vivek. It seems to me like a way to get a group of voters that don't tend to vote very Republican out of the electorate. That's what it feels like to me. Of like a fancy, you've articulated very well. It's very like civic-based, et cetera, et cetera. Use a lot of good language around it. But it seems very convenient that this group of voters is probably not going to vote for you or Donald Trump in very large numbers and are more likely to show show up for Joe Biden.
Crystal, let me see if I can convince you of my motivations.
Yep.
I understand, and
You don't
that's
need
a
to convince
reasonable.
me. I'm just
Yeah,
one
That's a
voter.
reasonable.
so-
That's a reasonable, Chris. But just for fun.
He's smiling. He knows he's caught. He's like, okay, yeah, that kind of is the idea. Look, this whole conversation that we're having here is crazy. It's crazy. We've had poll tests before in this country. We've had.
Kyle brings up a good point and just indicating that like that grin on his face, that does indicate that like, yeah, he was like busted. And yeah, Kyle's going to talk about similar stuff to what I had, that it's like, this isn't like a new or novel idea. Like these types of tests have been used primarily with the purpose of preventing some people from being able to vote. So this is an article basically highlighting the same idea that Ramaswamy is arguing, that we should be having civics tests. He basically goes on to cite a survey indicating that only 16% of Gen Z adults are proud to be American. Only 38% of adults say they're extremely proud to be American. And so that begs the question, is this because they don't know enough, or do they potentially know more than past generations did? Do they maybe know more controversy about the Vietnam War and the Iraq War and the way that wealthy individuals were bailed out in the 2008 financial crisis when regular working people were not? So again, that idea that we need to have some kind of test so that people will be more patriotic, I'm not sure if that completely holds up to scrutiny. He highlights this idea that like young people no longer value a nation, they simply inherit. So again, he's supporting a constitutional amendment that would make it basically implement civic duty voting amongst Americans aged 18 to 25. And so again, you have to look at the trends. Who are young people voting for when they do vote? Is this a self-serving idea? Would this idea help Republicans? How would that be for unions if Republicans are getting elected at higher rates? How would that be for climate change if Republicans are getting elected at higher rates? Definitely valid questions to bring up.